Okay, well, welcome everyone. 2 o'clock start time. Can everyone see my screen? We have our sign-in QR code, bit.ly if you need it. My name is Art Nelson Concordia. I'm a teacher on special assignment. I get to co-coordinate our ethnic studies work along with Nikhil Lod, and I get to work with a great history social studies team along with Amy Ritual, Terica Garcia. When you sign in, please make sure to select Ethnic Studies and U.S. History Live PD on the drop-down menu. And then make sure to click attending during contract hours, 2 to 3:30. After you sign in, on the chat, please write your name, your preferred pronoun, and your site. I'm going to close my window so you do not hear the neighbor's gardener. Okay, once again, please make sure to sign in on the chat, include your name, pronoun, and site. We're gonna go ahead, transition into our community connector, where, thank you, Mr. Mark Aquino over at Lincoln for our community connector on the scale of Drake to Drake. If you're not familiar with who Drake is, very popular social, cultural icon of this generation. And rate yourself, right? On a scale of Drake to Drake, which Drake are you, 1 to 10? And then the second prompt, I'm currently feeling this way because. So you'll access the Mentimeter through either the QR code on your screen or the link on the agenda, which has been posted on the chat. And if so, it's either right at the top, or Nikhil, you can repost that. You'll be able to access these 2 prompts. On a scale of Drake to Drake, which are you? And then the second prompt, some insight in terms of why. Yeah, Zoom is incredibly dehumanizing. It can be, it very much can be. I have 3 young people I'm responsible for, 6 and 7, and they are zooming toward a not good place. We have to figure these things out. And that is the spirit. That is the spirit. There's fatigue. Once again, zombies. I'm sensing that from my own children in real time here with them. Ooh, performative happiness. Oh, that hurts. Thank you for this. This is all absolutely being factored into our PD, and we're very much acknowledging of the realities once again, and really trying to leverage our collective strengths to figure a path to a better place. Thank you for sharing. Let's jump back to our slideshow. Slide deck. So everything, again, all of the resources we're sharing, from the slide deck to the unit overviews, all the related materials linked to the agenda. And so we're going to keep it moving. In this portion, we are going to be able to get into some small breakout groups, and we want you to think about this prompt. How do your identities show up in how you understand and teach history to our youth? So take a few minutes to free write, to silently think. We're going to get you into some small breakout groups. We're not that large a cohort, so we can have some intimate discussion around your thinking on this. Cool. Please.
Yeah.
So we'll ease into it again.
So, yeah, just so that, I encourage everyone just to take a breath and maybe a few deep breaths, and we can do that all together right now. Just based on the last activity, I would just want to acknowledge that we do that check-in to see and to acknowledge the context and the realities that we're all existing in, and to note that going further without acknowledging the present state that we're in doesn't contribute to making this Zoom instruction or this Zoom interaction more humanizing. And so given what everyone's feeling, what we're trying to offer today are some resources to help alleviate in possibly some way some of the stress that folks might be going through when it comes to having to like rewrite curriculum to this new setting. Even if you've taught for 5, 10, 15 years, everyone right now is seemingly a brand new first year teacher in some ways, right? And that's stressful, no doubt. What we hope to offer today is some framing around some resources that classroom teachers, your peers, have come up with to help support in the process. And they'll require adaptation, but we wanted to provide something that could be useful in saying one aspect of my life, maybe in this small corner, there's some things I can pull, and maybe we can start to alleviate some of that stress as best as we can. So we want to first start with the ways in which identity shows up and how we're teaching and how we're learning. Who are we? And how does who we are show up in what we do? And I think that hopefully will start to maybe even re-energize and recenter us. So that's the prompt. Let's give maybe 4 minutes to just think on it. You can show your screen or not. I'll play some instrumental music. Put me in the chat if that's not okay, with the music, I mean. And then we'll get into breakout groups.
Okay. Hopefully that was a fruitful exchange. We'd like to hear from 2 people. Maybe it captures a highlight, something that stood out from your small breakout group.
Oh, I could share. I didn't ask her if she wanted to share, but I was with Miss Eflin, and I thought it was really interesting how we're into, because I'm a Black male, so obviously my experience is really different. And she identifies as a white woman, and so we're doing the same work, but we're bringing different things into the room, and we're also acknowledging like what is different. Like she has to acknowledge her privilege, where I can understand what the students are going through. And it doesn't make us a better or worse teachers, right? That's not one of those things. But I felt so that dichotomy of what we're going through. So, and I appreciate her sharing that.
Right, universal experience, but very particular points of view and vantage points from how we're internalizing this world and this life. Thank you. So all of the different aspects of our being very much present in our being, but maybe we're not always conscious. I think we want to really make this a through line from beginning to end as we go through this PD in terms of who we are, what shows up, what we're aware of, when it shows up, and what we're not aware of. And I think as a really key connection to our students, and are thinking about how we can make as many opportunities as possible for them, who they are, and have that be connected to our teaching and our learning, our collective learning together. Any other thoughts on that, Laud?
No, I mean, that's kind of, I think what you said at the end is the piece that I would reinforce is we're thinking about our identities, because they inform the way we understand the world. They inform what we experience, but we also want to think about, we brought ethnic studies and American history teachers, US history teachers together because we saw the connections of identity and narrative in much of what these sample unit 1 overviews that we're going to break up and dive into a little bit. And so when we're thinking about that, it's important to think about, like, you know, who are we, and then what space are we giving for students to explore who are they, and who are they in connection to each other and in the larger world. So I think you hit it on the head perfectly, Art. Yeah.
So we are going to now take this opportunity to actually break up into 2 smaller cohorts. So before we begin, I want to make sure that everyone has the Unit 1 resources. Again, that's on your agenda or on the slide deck that you have access to. That has all of the lessons, the activities, the videos, the slide decks, the overview that will be shared with you in today's presentation by Annie and Thomas. And in addition to that, make sure that you have the U.S. History Classroom. This is the class code. Anything pertaining to U.S. history coming from central office will be coming down this line of communication. Good.
Can you quickly just give us the class code, because I thought I had signed up, but I did not.
So do you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
That RLVW4Y3. And again, it's also on the agenda, which should be on the chat, and I'll share that again in a second. All right. So a couple of questions we do want you to think about that will prime and get us ready for what Annie and Thomas will be sharing. We want you to think about who you are and from where you come as far as ancestral origin, right? Where are you originally from? And then secondly, what does it mean to be you, right? To be from where your ancestors originate. Open-ended, something to think about in relation to the Unit 1 overview we'll be experiencing that tackles the concept of indigeneity, right? Indigenous people, our relationships to the land. So again, a couple of questions for us to consider, and then we'll have that discussion in probably two smaller groups. So here is the overview. I'm wondering maybe if we start with the letter, Annie, and you could speak to that, and then we can give our teachers just some time to sit with the abundance of resources y'all have created. Would that be a place you feel good about beginning? Okay. Okay, your mic.
Okay, I feel like maybe I should just kind of summarize and sequence the contents of the letter, or just contextualize one letter, because it's kind of long. I think y'all can read it on your own. But hi everyone, I'm Annie Fawn. I teach at the Academy at McAteer. This is my 4th year teaching and my 4th year teaching US history. So in making this, I automatically knew that I didn't want to and couldn't do it alone. So I'm really grateful that Tom also signed up to do it, because he's been so supportive. And I think it was really nice because we've had an opportunity to work together over the last year in the Humanizing History cohort. And Art, would you mind going back to the letter, maybe? The whole unit is essentially what I usually do in my classroom is that I call it the lens of indigeneity, because we know that 1 year is never going to be enough to really dig into US history. And as people who live in the United States, whether citizen or not, it's important that I think that we just take a year to kind of give students the foundations to develop a more lifelong relationship to looking at US history and continually recognizing that there's always going to be something that they didn't learn in this class, right? So rather than looking back and being like, wow, I never learned that in US history class, my teacher failed me, it's going to be more like, oh, I didn't learn that in US history class, but my US history teacher gave me the tools needed so that I can receive it now, right? And that said, we still want to hit some things that we might consider more core and canon, but it's more about developing the skills and the perspective. So that's kind of that. I'm really passionate about curriculum building. I'm super passionate about US history. So I hope that that comes through. And yeah, so essentially in the letter, I talk about different beginnings of history. I take this from Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story, where she says that if we only know one story, we only get one perspective, and we need many stories. But I take it from a personal view and say that even my own story can start in different places. Like I'm gonna look back at my life and be like, oh, that was the day that changed everything. Like I was a new person after that, right? Or if this didn't happen to my dad, if my dad wasn't a refugee, like I wouldn't even be an American maybe, right? Like, so there are different ways where a story begins and shifts. So I talk about that in the letter. And I have like a decade of experience doing facilitation in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I started doing organizing around racial justice when I was 16 and successfully changed some structures of my school, including like a task force that included like all sorts of stakeholders. Like we talked about retention of Native people and recruitment at Pueblos to like our school. Was able to have our school develop a position for diversity coordinator so that we could start having those things. So all of this is also informed by actual praxis, recognizing that history and learning about the truth of these things should lead to action. So those things have kind of continually informed what I wanted school to look like. Yeah, so that's that. I think I give some information about how I typically introduce the unit when I have taught it, and recognizing the importance of like I think like what needs to be, at least for me, communicated here is that indigeneity is always about place. I learned about the indigenous people around me growing up in Albuquerque. So it was really strange to come here to San Francisco when I first started teaching here 4 years ago. And a lot of young people had never met, like didn't even know the names of a Native American tribe in their local area, or maybe barely at all. And I grew up and I was like, oh, well, my friends are Dene, and I had friends from Okewingate, and like I went to go to Laguna Pueblo to play volleyball against their team. So I just had a very different relationship to indigeneity, and that has also informed how I come here. So that said, I try to tell them about that. Like, hey, I grew up with a different relationship to Native people because they were kind of all around me. But that doesn't mean I know anything about any Native person because everyone brings their own experience to it. So I think I say here in that paragraph to try to take a guide approach. Like I'm here just offering my own things, but what I want to do is center Indigenous people and Indigenous voices, and I want you to listen to them. And I'm just kind of here to help curate that experience. And then basically the last couple things are just a bazillion links to lots of Indigenous voices that I listen to that inform my thinking and my work. I did add a slide somewhere in one of the decks about Black Native people too. So another thing that I'm thinking about with all this tension is that we don't want students to think that indigeneity or Blackness or Latinidad or these racial groups are all monolithic, but in fact, they're constantly intersecting. And like even within Indigenous, like Black people are Indigenous to like their experience in so many ways here in the United States. There are Black people who have tribal enrollment and ancestry. There are also Black people who consider themselves, like one of my friends, indigenous to the water. He sees that as his shaping of like what it means to be the descendants of like people who were enslaved, is that he sees them as coming out of the water and surviving and continuing. So just kind of throwing that all in there, bunch of links, and I'll let Tom take over, but that's essentially what the letter is. It gives a bunch of resources, hopefully a lot of perspective, and yeah.
Okay, I'm taking over, and I guess we go back to the overview. So if you scroll down, well, actually, let's stay right there with the unit summary. You can see it's broken down by weeks there. Each week has its own story in the summary. We open with an introduction to indigeneity through looking at the Ohlone people of the area and how they tell their own stories. Week 2, we get into this idea of the conflict of the encounter and settler colonialism. We look at one specific example, that is the gold rush. It's just a brief look at it. And then week 3, we focus specifically on one event that kind of shows the intersection again. Well, it's similar to the gold rush, how settler colonialism intersects with genocide. It doesn't mention it there, but we're looking at the Native American boarding schools. And then in the last week, we end on this note that the master narrative likes to talk about disappearance, and there is still a fight today around sovereignty and telling their own stories, which starts to talk on in weeks 1 and 2, when we come back to week 4. And then the final product is a letter that the students can choose who to write to. Originally, there was a day to looking at mascots, but we felt there needed to be more time to write the letter. And there's more here than I think can actually be taught based on my experience of the last week teaching distance learning. I know I won't be able to give all the stuff that's there. So I recommend looking at it and seeing what you can cut before you start. And I don't know, where do we go from here? You're muted, Art.
I was trying to say that I think it's a perfect segue now to actually give you some time,
Okay.
all of our participants, to just hang out with the material. Like, it's rich, it's deep, it's layered, there's so much. And from there we can then kind of generate, I think, real questions, discussion, and then locate where folks are at in terms of this approach to beginning the year.
And I will say that week 3, if you click on the week, everything in week 3 is pretty much ready for you. It's just not in this document yet. So you can click on week 3 in the overview and look at the lessons for that week.
Okay, so let's do this. You can, or let's take about 10 minutes. I'll start the timer and when I finish setting this up, and give you all an opportunity to just jump into not only the overview, but just the entirety of the resource that Annie and Thomas is created. And then we'll circle back with some discussion and then opportunity for Q&A with the authors. All right. Welcome back. The 10 minutes is nowhere near as much time as you need to really get deep into the resource. But hopefully it's an introduction, an opening, and we have some time now to ask some maybe clarifying, not maybe, to really anchor your questions to clarifying questions in relation to what you were observing. And then we'll be able to then spend some time in smaller groups thinking about the implications of what you are being presented, the implications on your own practice, how you might design a unit for your own context. So, and then we'll also get Tom and Annie a chance to to share with you what they've created as their final unit assignment. Any questions, folks? totally fine if nothing jumps out. You will have an opportunity to dig deeper in a few minutes. Annie, Thomas, you want to talk on the final assignment that you all developed for this unit?
Okay. I mean, yeah, I'll just start, I guess, and then whatever Tom wants to add. But we asked the Krisha Castillo, who helped with the 11th grade ELA, like how she was planning out the first month of curriculum for ELA, just to make it complementary with that side of the 11th grade experience. And in that one, the suggested culminating assignment is a letter to your generation. So we just decided that a letter was a cool way to push back against the myth of disappearance and make indigeneity relevant, because with a letter, you should be speaking to someone or someone's directly. So we gave some suggestions. You're welcome to adapt and shift it to make it more specific for your students if they need more guidance, to leave it more open-ended. But essentially they should just write a letter with 3 specific details and reflect on their experience and what they learned about indigeneity and what they think should be done. So some possible options are they could write to a loved one who doesn't know much, so they could be helping to educate someone they care about. They could write to the Washington football team about their recent mascot change. They could write to any Indigenous creators after having consumed their content, like A Tribe Called Red, for example, just expressing gratitude for what they learned from that voice. And then I just found out that Junipero Serra Elementary School is actually taking feedback from people in the community about renaming the elementary school, given Junipero Serra is like genocide of Indigenous peoples. So that actually might be another option for young people to engage with. And I just asked the teacher there and she said they'd really welcome like youth voices. So Tom, if you want to add anything.
The idea would be that you can see there's like a sentence explaining what each one does, and they do need to include references to their learning. So it's a way to document what they've learned. You should, as a teacher, produce your own model for students to see. And I think otherwise it's straightforward. Any questions?
Getting to know the Ohlone better, or the Nisenan or the Maidu, or sort of not, that's my only sort of like question, like how do you get so broad when there's hundreds of languages that are disappearing and hundreds of you know, First Nations, and like I like the idea of focusing it in San Francisco, I guess is what I'm saying, but kind of like maybe being a little bit broader at the beginning and then narrowing it down.
So your question would be how to stay focused while still having some meaningful context without getting too lost.
Lesson 4, literally, I mean, it probably isn't framed the best, but it actually, the resource there is about what you're talking about. It's about place in the Ohlone. The 10 minutes that they watch of the video there is about that. So I think it can be sort of veered towards that.
I think you did a really good job of that towards the, like, I think you really focused it in. Like, I feel like that was like the most powerful part of it.
Yeah.
Of when you went focused. But I feel like at the beginning, there needs to be a little bit more about like a broader picture of not only the Ohlone, but maybe even like 20 minutes even, or like, you know, like there's all these different nations. There's all these different people. They didn't actually get along, you know, like.
Jen, I think we're hearing that. Appreciate that feedback. And I think if we can maybe, I don't know, Annie, Tom, do you have something specifically? I mean, it's such a broad, I think, it's such a significant challenge. And yet we can't do it all, but we have an opportunity to do something meaningful.
In the first week, I had added an excerpt of the introduction of the Ohlone Way by Malcolm Margolin, and he, in like a very short term, kind of speaks to the limitations of how we, like as modern day peoples with a certain understanding of Western historians, are going to misunderstand the Ohlone. So in that excerpt, he does name that they are actually not one people. It's the Ohlone is the name of the local language group, and that it's a little more accurate to call them tribelets. But these people would actually not have seen themselves as being a unified confederation in the same way that like the Lakota do in the north, or even the Dene do as Navajo Nation. So it's a really short excerpt. I would recommend maybe spending some time there, having the students read it, and just maybe unpacking that. So yeah, that was the intention of that inclusion of the excerpt. So it's 2 paragraphs, but it's pretty dense.
Yeah, the resources Annie and Thomas curated are incredible. I think the answer isn't immediately in front of us. It is somewhere for us to piece together. And I think what they brought together here is a great, and that's an understatement, I think, starting point in figuring out how to do this justice, which I think is at the heart of what you're saying, Jen. So we are, I don't know where time went, but we are down to our last 10 minutes together. And I definitely want to maximize our opportunity with the unit authors for any questions from folks out there in the cohort, specifically to the resources you all explored briefly, and maybe even some thinking about what you might be and how you might be wielding this to your specific context. Any of our other participants, please feel free to jump in. And if not, it's totally fine as well, because I think what we have now, if you haven't had it, if you did not have it before, was, I think, connection to other colleagues doing meaningful work. You have access to myself and to Amy and to Nikhil. So I'll
add, as you can see in there, week 3 and 4 will be visible there by next Monday. You can actually click on, if you go down to week 3, the lessons are viewable if you click on the lesson links that are there, and then there's a folder link as well, so you can see a lot of the stuff. We did not have time to make slides for everything, but you have slides for some of it. And you can kind of see where we're going with week 4 with what is there. And week 4 does intend to be probably more general. So maybe we're kind of go from specific to more general might be a way of looking at it.
right.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry I missed. This is a work in progress, and those decks will be populated eventually?
The slides, no. The slides have what you have. Although actually week 4 will be slides probably. But there are slides for week 3. I think only lesson 5 does not have slides. But you're still gonna, not everything is in the slides necessarily, so you're gonna have to adapt that. But you can already look at week 3. All the stuff is in the links that are under week 3.
I really do want to emphasize that I think this is an incredible map with lots of detail. Not everything is filled out, but I really think you can get there. You have the ending culminating assignment, which I think is powerful. But then you can wield and then figure out how to move your students to get to that point. Along with all of these resources you have, I think we're very grateful for you than what you presented, what you put together here. Again, you all have access to each other, and if you can't get directly to them, you can get to them through us, and we'll connect you. We have 7 minutes left. David, was that no? Okay. I'm going to bring us back to the last two agenda items, and I think we very much do not want to lose sight of our through line questions that we shared at the beginning in relation to identity, how that shows up. And then we want to push, and we want to add, a second prompt. So if the first prompt that we discussed earlier was how your identities show up and how you understand and teach history to youth, the follow-up prompt we want you to consider is, what opportunities might there be in the unit you are creating for youth to explore their own identities and narratives? And it doesn't even have, and it's not even limited to Unit 1, but I think it's important for us to really have that question in mind. Where are the connections to the students in front of us, their families, their communities? And then how might we begin, if we haven't already, intentionally designing these connections into our teaching and learning? So first part. The second part of this, we are inviting you to do this on Screencastify. And it's basically a recording app that allows you to capture someone's reflection. We want it to be your reflection. And then you'll have access to your colleagues from today's session, all responding to these two prompts. Just a 2-minute recording. And the directions are here in front of you on the screen, as well as on the agenda. So again, it's an app we want you to use to respond to the 2 prompts above. And then you'll have an opportunity to get ideas from your colleagues, from our colleagues, about their reflections on how to make meaningful connection to our students' identities and the material, the content we are teaching. And then lastly, the eval form. Please, it would be very much appreciated if you could take 3 to 4 minutes to fill out that eval form, which is also linked on the agenda for today's session. Any questions? We could do that Screencastify capture. And if you're like, no, I can't do it, if you can just respond in the eval form, it's overlapping. We can capture your thoughts on that as well. But I think it's an opportunity to explore something you may have never used before. I captured my audio response this morning, and it was the first time I've used that app. A little nerve-wracking, and then in the end I learned something. With that said, I think our time here together is done. We have our econ, Modern World and Econ session tomorrow. Ms. Ritchell over here will be presenting or co-presenting the Modern World Unit 1. And then Helen Lee out of Lincoln will be presenting an Econ Unit 1. So again, 2 things: the Screencastify capture of your reflections on the 2 prompts, and then the eval form. Thank you again, Annie. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for all of our participants, and good luck. Anyway, I could go on and on about my own issues. I have deep gratitude. We have deep gratitude for you all. Take care. Drink water. Okay. May the force be with you all. Bye.
Bye.